All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is M. Cooper. I lead our strategy work here at LDOE. A couple of reminders before we get started. This meeting is being recorded, so if you have colleagues who are unable to attend, this recording will be posted in our Strong Start library, and it will also be linked in our weekly school newsletter. Also, a copy of the PowerPoint that's used today will be located in the Strong Start library as well and in the newsletter. So the copy of the presentation and a recording of the presentation will be available in case you have colleagues who are unable to attend today. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining. I know this is a crazy time for everyone, and I appreciate you all taking time today for us to walk through a toolkit that we released on Tuesday. If you have questions during the presentation, you can send them through the chat feature, and I will get to those during the presentation. So I'll take a break and stop to see if anyone has submitted questions and answer those aloud as well. So feel free to ask questions by sending those into the chat. So today's presentation is going to walk through the Toolkit for Teaching and Learning for Schools that was released this Tuesday. So we're going to start with an overview of the Strong Start 2020 plan, which is what the toolkit is aligned to. So to give you background about what your districts have been working on the past few months to ensure every student has a strong start this coming year. I'll then review the toolkit and the resources within the toolkit, and then just close out with some support structures that we have in place around the toolkit. So to start us off, when schools closed in March due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we released the Strong Start 2020 plan to ensure that school systems were planning for two things: a strong start for every student at the beginning of this school year, and that they were planning for what continuous education would look like for their school system. And so those two buckets of planning are located here on this slide. When we talk about a strong start for every student, we're really talking about three things. We're talking about every student's needs being identified, so assessing students as they come back to school for learning gaps and also their social and emotional health, making sure that students with the most significant gaps have a plan to address those gaps, and that we are supporting our high school students in continuing to be on track for graduation, but also for our graduates of spring 2020 to make sure that they transition to whatever career or college plans they have. For the continuous education planning piece, your school systems have created plans over the past several months that plan for every student pre-K through 12th grade having a device they can take home and also internet access. They've also developed a strategic communications plan for the community, parents, families, teachers about their plans for this upcoming school year, what instruction will look like, what their calendar will look like, expectations for staff, students, and things like that. They've also planned for how instruction will be delivered next year, so whether that's in person, virtual, or a hybrid. They're also addressing staffing needs. So based on the needs of staff in their school system, what staffing models are they building to make sure that those needs are met and that they are planning for what that looks like at each school. And the last thing for the continuous education is that they are building flexible calendars with their district calendar and then also school schedules. The Strong Start 2020 plan that we released builds upon your school system's strategic plan that already exists. So each year, school system leaders build a coherent plan that's aligned with high quality curriculum, teacher development, assessments, and they submit that in February of each year through an application called Super App. And so we want school systems to continue to implement those strong, coherent plans, but they do need to be adapted given the environment that we're in right now. And so the Strong Start 2020 plan helps them adapt their already strong district-wide plans. The planning guide that's linked here, and I'll also show you a link towards the end of the presentation, links to what your school systems used that was aligned to the priorities that I just mentioned. And we also provided funding to support this plan in your school system. So not only do we have priorities that your school system has committed to, but they've also received the funding to implement that at the district and school level. The planning guide that your school system leaders have used, again, is aligned to the strategic plan your district already has in place. It also provides funding guidance for your school system. It talks through the application that they submitted in May, and then provided them resources to develop those plans. I do want to walk through what those priorities look like for your school system, because this is what we based the toolkit on. So in the planning guide and in your school system strategic plan, they focus on 4 areas that are called domains: core academics, students with diverse needs, workforce talent, and LEA systems. Within each of these domains, there are priorities that your school system committed to. So here you'll see what the core academics domain looks like, and it lists the priorities that all of our school systems committed to implementing this coming year. In the core academics domain, we focused on assessing students through screeners or diagnostics when they come back to school in order for teachers to plan to address for the needs of students. It also talks about core, non-core, and CTE continuous instruction. And it also talks about ensuring that our recent graduates are supported and that high school students have updated individual graduation plans that ensure they're on track to graduation. The next domain that your school systems planned for was students with diverse needs. This domain includes ensuring student and staff well-being as a priority, and also that every student is provided a mental health screener when they come back to school, that English learners have access to curriculum and the materials that they need during continuous instruction, that students with disabilities have access to instruction and the materials they need during continuous learning, and that schools will conduct compensatory education reviews when students come back to school and provide services accordingly. The next area your school system planned for is workforce talent. And this includes a professional development plan that supports teachers throughout the year for distance learning protocols, addressing learning gaps, curriculum training, whatever the needs of that school may be. Also that they are ensuring mentor teachers, content leaders, and intervention content leaders are still being trained, whether that's virtually or in person throughout the school year. And the last piece here is about an adaptive staffing plan so that school systems and schools have addressed what staff will do upon modified operations what their responsibilities will be, and how they will adapt given different accommodations that may be needed. The last domain is LEA systems. This is where school systems are planning for their reopening of facilities. So what is their reopening plan? Very logistical, aligned with public health guidance. They're also thinking about calendars and schedules that maximize learning opportunities. They're developing a strategic communications plan so that every kid is connected with every day, and that students receive feedback at least weekly on their work, and that families understand what continuous learning looks like in their district or school. They also are ensuring a one-to-one student ratio for devices and internet access. And for those students without internet access or they're unable to get it, they are providing either internet access or a reliable phone line. And the last piece here is ensuring that pre-K seats match the amount of pre-K seats from the previous school year. So ensuring that pre-K is maintained for the upcoming school year. So all of these priorities were a part of the Strong Start 2020 plan that your school system has been working on over the past several months. We received a lot of feedback from school system leaders that we needed a version of this for our school leaders and teachers so that they know how to implement the priorities that were related to teaching and learning at the school level. And so our toolkit for teaching and learning for schools is directly aligned to Strong Start. It is only focuses on the priorities that are aligned to teaching and learning. And this is really an action guide. So this is, what do these priorities look like in action at the school leader or teacher level? In the toolkit, of the priorities that are aligned to teaching and learning, there is one document that includes samples, models, and plans for how to implement these priorities. And we've used examples from school systems in our state or organizations in our state and across the country for what this looks like as far as implementation. In addition, there are school actions for each priority, and these are just a starting point for your team to think about. This is not an exhaustive list of all the actions that need to take place, but they are the most important places to start. This is what each page of the toolkit looks like. So it is aligned to those 4 domains of school system planning, which is core academics, workforce talent, students with diverse needs, and LEA systems. And each page lists the Strong Start 2020 priority. Then you'll notice in the next section, these are the school actions, and they are split into 3 categories: actions schools need to plan, implement, or communicate. Then there is the one document that is linked called the implementation resource, and that is your one-stop shop for how to implement that priority at your school. And then there's a section for teams to take notes, list ideas, next steps based on either the school actions or the resource that they look through. So I want to walk you through each of these resources. The resources have a familiar feel and format to them. So there's, again, one resource per priority. It has samples, plans for school leaders and teachers to implement that priority. And they are categorized by things schools need to do now or do next. And so you'll notice the little graphic next to those items so that you have essentially a timeline of what's the most important things to do now, which are usually before school starts, and then the things that you can do next. Any resource that is new is labeled on the document with the word new in front of it so that you know this is not a document that's already existed that maybe you've already looked at, but it is brand new for the toolkit. There are also samples within each of these documents from school systems or organizations, and it will have their name in front of it. So here you'll notice we have examples from St. Landry Parish, West Baton Rouge, and Ascension, and so it will let you know which school system sample is located in the document as well. All right, so let's jump into the first priority in the toolkit. This one is about implementing assessment and individual plans. So you'll notice here the priority that is the same priority in the Strong Start 2020 plan is listed at the top. You'll see the school actions for planning, implementing, and communicating, and then the implementation resource, which is implementing assessment and individual plans. Some things to highlight about the resource here are that once you select the implementation resource, you are going to be brought to a document that gives you sample assessment calendars for your school, what individual learning plans could look like, so samples from different grades about how teachers use that assessment data to then create an individual plan for students, sample parent letters for how remote administration occurs for the assessments, and that would be for your screeners and for diagnostics. And then there are resources for ELA and math instructional planning. So this includes documents that walk you through mapping of the LEAP 360 diagnostic items to your modules in all the high quality curriculum. It also has examples of how to adapt lesson plans and things like that. And then there's also resources for assessing students. So the administration of assessments, which assessments you're choosing from, and then how to address those learning gaps throughout the year. The next priority is implementing continuous core instruction. So again, same format, you'll see the priority, the action schools need to take for planning, implementing, and communicating, and then the link to the implementation resource. So for this priority, this is focused on ensuring that during continuous education, meaning students are either in a virtual or hybrid model, that aligned high quality curriculum is still being used, and so is high quality instruction. And so in this resource, you'll see samples of how to provide feedback to students in a virtual setting, sample parent letters about what instruction will look like in a virtual setting, how to adapt your lesson plans, best practices for virtual learning, and then also resources on how to adapt your lessons to a hybrid or virtual model. The next priority is similar, but this is focused on continuous non-core instruction. So this is CTE, your arts classes, electives, things like that. And in this resource, you'll see a sample classroom support tool, which is aligned to our core classroom support tool. So we have our K2 and 312 ELA and math and science support tools. This is one for non-core and CTE. So what does good instruction look like virtually in these courses? They've aligned that tool to be very helpful for your non-core and CTE teachers. Also, different types of communications that parents would receive around these classes, including how CTE courses may be modified given a virtual delivery. Guidance for how to distribute materials. So the processes that could take place, samples of what this looks like in other districts, how do you account for the materials, check them out, agreements and things like that, or ways you would communicate with parents about the materials they receive. And then also resources for how to adapt your non-core and CTE lessons lessons to a hybrid and virtual model. The next priority is implementing student and staff well-being. So this is focused on students and educators being provided the social and emotional and behavioral supports they need. And one of those pieces that your school systems has committed to is that every student receives an emotional and behavioral health screening upon return to school. So in this document, you will see links to screeners that can be used, how to administer screeners, scripts for teachers to read when administering the screener, how to interpret those results and plan for the needs of students based on the screener results. So we also have sample individual student plans for different grades. There's also for school leaders sample culture and climate surveys that can be administered to your team, and also sample schedules for what well-being support may look like from your school counselor or other support personnel that may be on your campus, such as social workers and things like that. The next priority is implementing professional development. And this is focused on ensuring that teachers still receive the professional learning they need throughout the school year, regardless of closures at schools or delivering instruction virtually. And so this focuses on your initial curriculum training, how to address the needs of students, mentor, teacher, content leader, intervention content leader training. It is comprehensive of all professional learning for teachers and also includes virtual training. In this document, you'll see sample professional development calendars for schools and professional development plans, best practices and agendas for virtual common planning meetings. So that includes, what does setting norms look like on a virtual common planning meeting call? And then also resources for how to plan your professional development throughout the school year. So this is very school leader focused, but also to the teacher level as far as what is common planning going to look like during a Zoom call or some kind of virtual delivery. The next two priorities are actually combined in one resource because they really work hand in hand together. So we have two priorities here. One is about your staffing plan. So assessing the needs of your staff and then using that information to create a staffing plan. So who's doing what during what type of delivery and what their responsibilities are, what accommodations need to occur. But then the second priority is about your school calendar and schedule. And those really work very closely together. And so the resource for both of these priorities syncs the two of those things. So when you access the implementing adaptive and flexible school staffing plan or school schedule link, you'll be provided sample personnel surveys. The principals, this is something you can administer to your teachers to find out their plans for coming back to school, what needs they have. There's also resources for how to build the adaptive staffing plan and design a school schedule. And then you'll also see models for elementary, middle, and high school for what it looks like to come back to school in different ways. So whether it's A-Day, B-Day, all virtual, some sort of hybrid model, there's links to several of those, including videos of how to do that. There's also links to district calendars as well. So what does it look like if you have a year-round schedule with intersessions? What does it look like if you start after Labor Day? What does it look like if you add instructional minutes? So how are you really maximizing time throughout the year? And either one of these links will take you to the same document. The next priority is about strategic communications plans. And while a lot of this happens at the school system level, a lot of it also happens at the school level. And so this is both a school leader and teacher tool as well. This focuses on students having outreach by an adult at the school every day, students receiving feedback weekly, and then helping families understand what school is going to look like for the upcoming year. And so whenever you access this document, you will see sample student engagement templates. So how do you track connection with kids every day? How can you use the data from those trackers to have meetings with your leadership team? What do you do if if teachers have tried to reach out to students for multiple days in a row and there's no response? How do you use that data? What does attendance look like in a virtual setting? There's also sample school reopening communications plans in this document. So the types of communications school leaders need to think about. So what does this look like if you have a student that tests positive for COVID? How do you handle rumors about things that may or may not be happening in your district or school? How do you communicate with parents at the beginning of the year about what instruction will look like? So there's not only a list of the things that school leaders should think about, but there are templates for all of those things that you can just plug and play to make fit for your school. And then there's resources for how to use the data for contacting students every day, including sample agendas of what those meetings might look like at the school leader level. The last priority is about device and access. So again, this priority, school systems are ensuring every student pre-K to 12 has a device and that they have internet connectivity or a reliable phone line if they're unable to access internet. In this resource, you will see sample device and access surveys that schools can send to parents. Also, what a distribution schedule may look like at your school. So a calendar of how to provide those devices or hotspots to students. Technology letters to families, including what the responsibilities are of that student or family for receiving a device, how to access all of the tools that your school is going to be using. So if that's online portals, if that's a learning management system, so letters for you to use as a template for reaching out to your families. And then also sample training options. So what does it look like to train my teachers, students, and parents on what technology we're going to use, what it looks like, what portals we're going to have, how they're going to access it, but definitely something that school leaders should be thinking about, and there's tons of samples in there. I'm just going to pause and see if there's any questions in the chat before we close out. We've gotten a couple questions about this being recorded and posted. So for those of you that hopped on late, we are recording this presentation, and not only will a copy of this PowerPoint be included on our Strong Start library, but the recording will be as well. So both the recording and PowerPoint will be posted in our library. It will also go through our weekly school system newsletter, so it'll be linked in there as well. We have a question about the templates within the resource. So each priority has one link. So implementing assessment and learning plans, implementing one-to-one device and access, implementing professional development. That one document will bring you to, and actually I'll show you, I'll pull this back up in case you all miss this, will bring you to that resource, which looks like this. Within each of the resources, all of the links to templates, sample school system plans, resources will all be on that one document. Okay, we have a question about the content leader, intervention content leader, and mentor teachers. So I'm glad glad you asked this. So it is required for our CIR schools, comprehensive intervention required schools, to have an ELA and math content leader. They've already selected who these are. Most of them have begun training. If you are not a CIR school, you are not required to have an ELA or math content leader. You may have a content leader at your school because your school system chose to implement that, but it is not a requirement. It is only a requirement of an ELA or math content leader at CIR schools. If you are a UIR school, so urgent intervention required, meaning you have a student group that has a student group that's failing, you are labeled UIR, you are required to have 2 intervention content leaders. You've already selected them, you've already started sending them to training, you should keep doing that. It is required for you. If you are not a UIR school, it is not required that you have an intervention content leader, although your school system may have implemented that anyway, or you may have chosen to add those to your staff. And then for mentor teachers, you are required to have a mentor teacher if you are a CIR school. But again, a lot of our schools have mentor teachers, even if they're not a CIR school, but those are the requirements. So again, just to recap, if you are a CIR school, comprehensive intervention required, you are required to have a mentor teacher, an ELA content leader, and a math content leader. If you are a UIR school, urgent intervention required, you are required to have 2 intervention content leaders. The second part of the question is if your school wants to enroll people for this, so you want to add this, this is something you can absolutely do. So I would reach out to your district point of contact for this. It's typically a professional development or an HR director. And so I would reach out to them to see if you can add those roles to your school, even if you're not required to have them. But yes, that's something any school can do regardless of whether or not they're required. The next question is about where can we find this on the website. So let me bring you to the last slide. There's a couple places you can find this information. First, if you go to the Louisiana Believes website on the homepage, you will see a button that says Strong Start 2020. It is right at the top of the page. If you click that, it will bring you to the Strong Start library, and that's where this is located. I've also linked here a direct link to the toolkit, a direct link to the Strong Start library and landing page. I also linked 2 other things that you all may be interested in, although not essential. I linked to the Strong Start 2020 planning guide that I mentioned at the beginning. If you're just interested in what your district's been working on for several months and what they've all committed to doing, just to give you more background about how the toolkit is connected. So if you want to check that out, I linked that here as well. Again, if you go to the Strong Start 2020 page, it's all there. And then the last link is to the school reopening guidelines and resources. So this is, excuse me, this is specific to the logistics and operations aligned with public health. So I linked all of these things here for you, but you can access them by going to louisianabelieves.com and clicking that button on the homepage that says Strong Start 2020. And the next question is, where will this be posted? So the link to this PowerPoint and the recording will be in the same place. So all in the Strong Start library, one place for you to go, and it will have everything you need there. The next question is about what daily contact with students means. So if you have students that are coming in person, that teacher is making contact with those students. If they are at home that day, whether they're in a virtual setting full-time or a hybrid model, the teacher has students in their classroom, they are contacting that student every day. I think that there is also a piece of schools that are using a model where a teacher is not teaching live, so through a virtual delivery, meaning they're at home and they may be doing work on their own time. That student needs to be contacted every day. And I think that that is looking different school to school, not even school system to school system. So that could mean a phone call, email, they're jumping on for, you know, like a quick check to see how they're doing with their work. That could look very different. That is up to your principal and your school system, but there are multiple ways that contact can be made. It doesn't necessarily have to be in person, especially for those students who are doing a hybrid or virtual model. All right, the last with you before we wrap up is if you have questions as your schools are planning for the upcoming year, questions about what reopening looks like, questions about the toolkit or Strong Start 2020, we will begin doing office hours next week. They will be every Thursday through September 3rd at 3 o'clock. The webinar details are located here, but again, it's in the weekly school system newsletter as well. And this is very informal. So this is a space for you to call in to not only ask questions that you may have, but listen to questions others are having and the answers that we're providing. So this is definitely a good space if you want to join just to listen, but also if you have questions. And that's at 3 o'clock on Thursdays through September 3rd. And then the last piece is if you have questions about Strong Start, reopening, guidance aligned to public health, the toolkit, you can definitely reach out to me, but you can also reach out to our COVID account. So that's LDOE COVID-19 support at la.gov. And we will connect with you as soon as possible to help you with whatever questions you have. All right, I don't see any other questions, but as a reminder, this presentation and the recording will be posted in our Strong Start library. We really appreciate you all joining, and we hope that this toolkit is helpful for you as you dive in to implementing these priorities at your school. Thanks again for joining. Have a great week.